Welcome to this deep dive. We're cracking open a stack of sources today, all focused on upcoming MLS matches and, well, how a pretty sophisticated AI system tries to make sense of them.
That's right. And our mission really is to pull out the most important nuggets, the key knowledge these sources offer, understanding the different lenses they use, everything from cold, hard data to uh, maybe fuzzier stuff like weather and history.
Yeah, exactly. We've got three interesting matchups on the docket. Vancouver Whitecaps against Seattle Sounders, Portland Timbers hosting St. Louis City SC, and then a look at Nashville SC taking on NYCFC. Let's see what the sources dig up.
Okay, but before we jump right into the games, the source material actually spends a bit of time explaining the predictive engine itself, the thing that generated a lot of these insights.
Okay, yeah, let's do that. Tell me about this engine. What is it? How does it work?
So the core system they describe in the sources, it's called SmartBet AI. You can think of it as their super powered analytical tool.
Superpowered, huh? How superpowered are we talking here?
Well, it's built on a pretty huge foundation. It's been trained on data from over 12,000 previous MLS games.
12,000. Wow. That's a lot of history to learn from.
Definitely gives it a lot of patterns to recognize.
So is it just one giant black box, or does the source kind of break down what's actually inside?
No, they do break it down. It blends different approaches.
Mm.
It uses some traditional statistical models, like one that's good at predicting goal counts. They specifically mention Poisson regression for that.
Poisson regression. Okay, I've heard that term. What does that actually mean for me, trying to figure out goals?
It just means it's a standard statistical method. It's often used in sports to model the probability of a certain number of events happening.
Like goals in a match.
Exactly. So that's
Yeah.
one tool in the toolbox for predicting, goal likelihood.
Got it. Okay. And what else is in the mix?
They incorporate things like ELO ratings. You might know those from chess or other sports.
Yeah, yeah. Track strength over time.
Right. It's a way to measure team strength that adjusts after every game based on, wins, losses, opponent strength. Plus, they factor in specific adjustments for injuries, player availability.
Ah, okay. So it's not just looking at team names, it's actually looking at who's likely on the pitch.
Precisely. And then they layer on more modern machine learning techniques. The sources list 4 different types they use. Things like random forests, neural networks.
Whoa. Okay, that sounds complicated. Why use 4 different ones? Isn't one good enough?
That's a good question. The idea, as described in the sources, right, is that different types of models are maybe better at finding different kinds of patterns in the data.
Okay.
So using a mix helps capture a more complete picture, makes the overall prediction maybe more robust than just relying on one single algorithm. It's like having multiple experts look at the same problem from slightly different angles.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Diversifying the analysis. And how does it use all this information for one specific match then?
It runs simulations, lots of them. The source says for each fixture, it simulates the game 10,000 times using a Monte Carlo method.
10,000 times.
Yeah.
Wow. What's it feeding into those simulations?
It's using all the data points we've been talking about. The expected goal rates, the XG based on recent form, player availability, home advantage, the estimated impact of missing players. And interestingly, they even factor in the implied probabilities derived from market betting odds.
Really? It looks at the betting markets.
Yeah, essentially what the collective wisdom of the betting market suggests. It pulls that probability in too.
That's wild. I also saw one little detail in the source. It mentioned the system even checks for, like, spelling errors in team names.
Haha. Yeah, well, you got to keep the data clean, right? Keeps the models happy. But the important thing for you to know is that the output isn't just, team A wins.
Right, right. They provide more than just a winner.
Much more, yeah. They give you full probability spreads, home win, draw, away win percentages. Plus these detailed maps showing the likelihood of every possible scoreline, like 1-0, 2-1, 1-1, you name it.
Okay. So this section really gave us, and you listening, a peek behind the curtain of this pretty sophisticated system the sources are using. We kind of understand the tools before we look at their output.
Exactly. It gives context to the numbers we're about to see.
All right, let's jump into the first match then. A classic Cascadia Cup clash. Vancouver Whitecaps hosting the Seattle Sounders.
Okay, this one's up at BC Place in Vancouver. And the sources note the environmental conditions shouldn't really be a factor here. Clear skies, Pretty pleasant temperature, like around 60 degrees, low wind.
Weather's out.
Mm.
But injuries.
Yeah.
Injuries are definitely a factor mentioned pretty prominently in the source material. Seattle is missing some really key players. Jordan Morris, Yammer Gomez, and Paul Arriola.
Yeah, that's huge. Morris and Arriola are big offensive threats, right? And Yammer is a defensive leader for them. That weakens them significantly, you could argue, at both ends.
For sure. And Vancouver's also missing a major piece in Ryan Gold, who the source calls their creative engine. So both teams are hit, but maybe Seattle's absences feel a bit more impactful across the whole squad.
That seems to be the read from the sources, yeah. Now, looking at what the AI models actually say about this specific matchup, the ELO ratings give Seattle a slight historical edge, 1546 versus Vancouver's 1533.
Okay, so historically, or maybe based on consistent form over time, Seattle is seen as slightly stronger by that one metric.
Exactly. But when you look at the expected goals, the XG outputs from that Poisson model we mentioned, it's incredibly tight.
Right.
Vancouver at 1.34 expected goals, Seattle at 1.26.
Wow, that's close. What does that really tell us then?
It tells us that based on, typical shot locations and quality, the models see this game as statistically almost a coin flip in terms of potential goal scoring. Very little separating them there.
And the sources mentioned another model, a bootstrapped model, refining those numbers just slightly.
Right. It's just another statistical method to get a more robust estimate. It puts Vancouver at 1.40 xG and Seattle at 1.22. But the key insight here maybe is the potential range of goals. The sources note the confidence intervals run from 0 to 4 for both teams.
Confidence interval from 0 to 4. What do they mean in plain English for like a Oscar game?
It means the model is saying there's a reasonable probability that either team could score anywhere from 0 goals up to maybe 4 goals in this specific match. It just highlights the inherent volatility, While the average XG is around 1.3, the actual outcome could swing quite a bit either way.
Okay, so volatility is baked in. So when the AI ran those 10,000 simulations based on all this, what was the bottom line prediction?
Well, it landed almost dead even, pretty much as you'd expect from that tight XG. The simulations show a home win probability for Vancouver at 38.83%, a draw at 25.71%, and an away win for Seattle at 35.46%.
So the AI also sees it as basically a toss-up, maybe slightly favoring the home side, Vancouver, but barely.
Pretty much, yeah. And the most predicted scoreline in all those simulations, it was 1-1, showed up almost 12% of the time. After that, it was 1-0 and 0-1, which kind of confirms that narrow one-goal margins were the most common outcomes in the Sims.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting, and the sources definitely highlight this as a key takeaway. When you look at the individual AI models that make up the ensemble, they actually disagree.
Yeah, this is important. Despite the overall ensemble leaning slightly home, the fact that, some models favored Seattle away, one favored Vancouver home, and another picked a draw. That's specifically flagged as a red flag in the source material.
A red flag. What does that signal to the sources or, to us?
It signals uncertainty within the AI system itself. Basically, when the different algorithmic approaches can't agree, it means there might be complex factors or conflicting signals in the data that just aren't providing a clear consensus. It's kind of the AI equivalent of shrugging a little bit.
Huh. Okay, so uncertainty is the key insight from that model disagreement. So given all this, the tight data, the injuries, that model variance, what are the practical takeaways or, say, betting angles the sources point towards?
Well, they highlight that both teams to score yes seems like a strong possibility. Neither defense is, watertight. And despite the injuries, both teams still have enough attacking threat probably to find the net.
Okay. They also mentioned under 2.5 goals is kind of borderline.
Right. The models lean towards fewer goals rather than like a high-scoring shootout. It suggests a match likely characterized by control, maybe some cautious play, perhaps wasted chances, rather than nonstop attacking action.
And for specific scorelines, 1-1 is the lead prediction from The Sims. But 1-1 Euro Vancouver is also noted as having potential value, especially recognizing that home advantage at BC Place.
And the double chance market, Vancouver or draw, that's seen as offering some value too. I mean, given Seattle's key injuries and the split opinions from the models, betting against a Seattle win seems like a reasonable approach, according to the source.
Right. One final note from the source on tactics. Seattle still has speed in transition, but maybe lacks that critical finishing quality without Morris and Arriola.
So yeah, putting it all together for Vancouver-Seattle, the source's bottom line seems to be expect a tight game, likely moderate scoring, good chance both teams find the net. It's characterized as kind of a low volatility situation, maybe suggesting a smaller stake if you were wagering.
A real talk-up, yeah, even for the AI. And speaking of Vancouver and Seattle, the source material included this fantastic historical anecdote that really captures the intensity of this rivalry.
Ah, yes, the famous 2011 Cascadia earthquake. You gotta love that story.
Tell me about this. What actually happened?
So this was way back in 2011. It was Vancouver's first year in MLS, and their very first rivalry game at their, revamped home ground, BC Place, was against Seattle.
Oh, man, the atmosphere must have been absolutely electric.
The source describes it so vividly. The stadium was just packed, 22,000 fans, scarves waving everywhere, nonstop chanting for 90 minutes. And apparently for once, it wasn't raining in Vancouver.
Huh. And they said it felt like an earthquake. Like, literally.
Apparently, yeah. Reporters and fans in the stadium described the building feeling like it was shaking, genuinely like a mild tremor. But when they checked seismic activity later, nothing.
Yeah.
No earthquake logged.
Wow, so just pure fan energy shaking the concrete. That's insane.
Exactly. Spilled beer everywhere, people losing their voices, Seattle players saying they couldn't even hear each other on the pitch. Just total chaos driven by the noise.
There's that great quote in the source about it.
Yeah, it felt like the building was shaking, but it was just 22,000 Canadians shouting "SeaTac sucks" in perfect rhythm.
That's just incredible. It really highlights why this rivalry is considered so legit and generational in MLS, as the source puts it. The atmosphere itself becomes a real factor.
Oh, absolutely. It's a perfect example of how things that aren't purely quantifiable data points can absolutely influence the feeling and maybe sometimes even the outcome of a game.
Totally. All right, let's shift gears, but stay in the Pacific Northwest region for our next matchup. Portland Timbers hosting St. Louis City SC.
Okay, this game's down at Providence Park in Oregon. Conditions look sunny and warm, around 79 degrees Fahrenheit, but there is a chance of scattered thunderstorms mentioned.
Right, but the standout environmental factor highlighted in the source material, it's the wind, potentially gusting up to 28 miles per hour.
Yeah, that's significant. The source really emphasizes that this kind of wind can impact play quite a bit, especially things like, corner kicks, free kicks, long balls over the top. Add in the tight pitch and that notoriously fast turf at Providence Park. You've got conditions maybe ripe for some unpredictability.
Okay. What about injuries for this match?
Portland's missing a few key players, notably Jonathan Rodriguez, James Pantemis, and Zach McGraw. McGraw is called out specifically as their aerial rock defender. He's out with a back problem.
Losing a key aerial defender against a team that might be dealing with windy conditions on set pieces, that seems potentially problematic.
It could be, yeah. In St. Louis, they're missing defender Joachim. The source points out this could leave their left flank maybe a bit more exposed, which could be dangerous against Portland's wide attacking players.
Okay, so both teams have some defensive concerns due to injuries. Now, what does the AI engine say about this matchup, starting with those ELO ratings?
The ELO ratings here show a much clearer edge for the home side compared to the last game. Portland's at 15-15, while St. Louis is down at 14-59.
Okay, so unlike Vancouver-Seattle, the AI sees a more significant structural strength advantage for Portland, kind of built up over the season.
Precisely. And the expected goals, the cut XG, they back that up pretty strongly. The Poisson model predicts Portland at 1.62 XG versus St. Louis at just 1.08.
That's a much more substantial gap than we saw in the Vancouver-Seattle game.
Yeah, it is. The bootstrapped model refines it slightly, putting Portland at 1.65 XG with a potential range up to 4 goals, mind you, and St. Louis at 1.10. Also with a volatile range, but less upper end potential than Portland. The key insight really is that the data consistently predicts Portland generating significantly better scoring chances.
Okay, so running those 10,000 Monte Carlo simulations, what's the overall outcome probability look like?
Portland comes out as a near 50% favorite to win according to the simulations. The home win probability is 49.65%, draw is 24.61%, and an away win for St. Louis is 25.74%.
That's a pretty solid lean towards the home side. What about the top predicted scorelines?
1-0 for Portland is the most common, showing up about 11.6% of the time. That's followed up by 2-1, then 1-1. So again, predicting narrow margins generally, but those Portland wins are showing up much more frequently in the simulations this time.
And what's fascinating here, especially contrasting with the last game, is the model spread, right? The agreement between the different AI models.
Yes. This is where you see that AI consensus really kicking in. The source highlights near full agreement among the individual models. Random Forest, XG Boost, Light GBM, and the overall ensemble all point towards a Portland home win. Only one model, the MLP, shows a slight lean towards a draw.
Wow, that's a much, much stronger signal from the AI system compared to the Vancouver game.
Exactly. And the source specifically notes that this rare level of agreement within the model strongly backs up the tactical reads they have on this match. The data isn't conflicted here, it's pointing pretty clearly.
Okay, so what are those tactical reads and betting angles then, based on this consistent data and the other factors like wind and injuries?
Well, the top takeaway, according to the sources, is Portland to win. It's supported across the models, it's backed by the injury situations, and of course, their strong home form at Providence Park.
Both teams to score US is also seen as likely.
Yeah, seems likely. Even with Rodriguez potentially out, Portland still creates chances. And St. Louis, despite lower expected goals, they have shown a tendency to kind of poach roles, often on the counterattack.
Okay, what about under 2.5 goals?
That one's seen as borderline. The weather, specifically that strong wind, could definitely disrupt attacking play and finishing, which would make lower scores more probable. But Portland's higher XG kind of pulls it close.
Makes sense. Correct score leanings.
Leaning towards 2-1 and 1 new for Portland, consistent with the simulations.
And the source brings up the wind again, tactically.
Yes, they suggest the wind could actually neutralize some of St. Louis's typical counterattacking speed, maybe forcing the game into more of a midfield. Slugfest is the word they used. And critically, set pieces at Providence Park are expected to be vital, especially with St. Louis showing some weakness defending aerial threats. A weakness potentially amplified by the wind, and maybe Portland missing their own aerial rock and McGraw complicates that picture too.
Right. Interesting dynamic there. So the summary for this match from the sources seems pretty clear. Portland has the data edge, the home field advantage, and maybe even conditions that could work in their favor against St. Louis's usual style.
Yeah, the data is pointing much more strongly one way in this one, definitely.
All right, let's move away from Cascadia then and head south for our final match preview. Nashville SC versus NYCFC.
Okay, and this segment, it presents a slightly different kind of analysis from the source material. They sort of step away from the standard AI model output a bit to make what they explicitly call a bold call.
A bold call. Okay, intrigued. What makes this one different? Why step away from the AI?
Well, it's about layering in factors that maybe the standard models don't fully capture, or at least don't weigh as heavily. The conditions in Nashville are seen as a huge part of it. It's expected to be hot and humid around 79 degrees Fahrenheit, but with nearly 70% humidity.
Okay, heat and humidity. And why is that considered so important according to these sources?
They really emphasize that this sticky southern edge, as they put it, that environment is physically draining. Particularly, they argue, for a team like NYCFC that trains in much cooler conditions up north. It just wears teams down over 90 minutes.
Okay, so weather is a key narrative factor here, not just a data point. What else contributes to this bold call?
A big one is NYCFC missing their midfield anchor, James Sands. The source describes him as the player who really controls their tempo, breaks defensive lines with his passing, sets the whole rhythm of their play. Losing him is seen as a major blow to their ability to control the center of the park.
Gotcha. And how does Nashville potentially play into that specific absence?
Well, Nashville's tactical approach, as described in the sources, often includes a high press. So the idea is they can specifically target that gap, that lack of control created by Sands' absence in NYCFC's midfield, potentially forcing turnovers in dangerous areas of the pitch.
Okay, so you combine the physical drain from the heat and humidity
Yeah.
with NYCFC missing their key midfield controller. And Nashville's high press may be targeting that exact weakness. So this is what leads to the source's bold call.
Exactly. The specific prediction they make based on this narrative is Nashville SC 2, NYCFC 1.
Wow, a specific scoreline. And they even explain how they think those goals might come about based on these narrative factors.
They do, yeah. The first goal, they predict, comes from exactly that scenario. A turnover forced by Nashville's press near NYCFC's defensive third, a quick pass wide, and a player like, say, Schaffelberg or Bunbury getting in behind the defense to finish.
Okay, capitalizing directly on that pressure and the midfield gap. Makes sense.
Right. And the second goal is predicted to come from a set piece. Nashville is noted as being particularly dangerous on corners at home anyway, and those potential wind gusts we mentioned earlier could be up to 28 miles per hour there too, could add an element of chaos, making a header or deflection more likely.
Okay, so the source's bold call is really built on these very specific, tangible game factors: the heat, the key absence, the tactical matchup. Why does this perspective differ from what the standard AI model might say? I assume the AI saw it differently.
This is kind of the core insight of this section, yeah. The source explains that while the standard models are great for probability based on historical data and averages, they don't really feel things, right? They don't feel accumulating fatigue from heat or jet lag or game momentum shifting or the specific psychological impact of losing a key player like Sands. NYCFC's away form without Sands is specifically noted as dipping historically. So the idea is Nashville might just be able to push harder late in the game against a tired, maybe slightly disorganized NYCFC side, leading to this specific 2-1 outcome.
Ah, okay. So it's really about understanding the potential limitations of pure data in certain situations and layering in that real-world context, the stuff that's harder to quantify.
Precisely. The source calls it a gut read layered on a strong foundation of underlying data knowledge. It's not ignoring the data, but adding to it.
Right. And the takeaways or angles from this particular perspective.
Yeah. Well, obviously, the correct scoreline, 2-1 Nashville, is the lead prediction here. Both teams to score YUS is a lean, naturally, with a 2-1 score. And interestingly, they lean towards over 2.5 goals. Because the thinking is the weather and tactics might actually increase the tempo and chance creation through turnovers and transitions rather than stifling it like wind might elsewhere.
Interesting take. And anytime scorer leans towards those Nashville attacking players mentioned.
Yeah, like Schaffelberg or Bunbury, depending on who starts and gets those chances created by the press. And again, the source really stresses this is a bold call. It still warrants, small, smart wagering if you choose to bet based on it.
Okay, so we've taken quite a deep dive today into 3 MLS matches using these sources. We looked at those Pacific clashes and then this Southern showdown. We saw how a really sophisticated AI system provides these data-driven probabilities and predicted outcomes.
Yeah, and we also saw a slightly different perspective, one that layered on critical, maybe non-quantifiable factors like severe weather, key injuries, and specific tactical matchups to make a more narrative-driven, bold call.
The wisdom from these sources, it seems to me, is that soccer is this fascinating blend, isn't it? It's predictable patterns that data can capture, but also unpredictable chaos influenced by all these real-world conditions.
Absolutely. The models give us probabilities, useful probabilities, but they aren't dictating fate. You always have to respect the variance, the randomness inherent in the game.
It really encourages you, the listener, to think about all the different elements at play, doesn't it? You've got the numbers, sure, but then the wind, the heat, who's injured, how the teams match up tactically, maybe even that history, like the Cascadia earthquake story.
All pieces of the puzzle.
So maybe a final thought for you to chew on. As you think about these games, or any game, how much do you weigh the comprehensive data models versus those specific tangible factors like extreme heat or the absence of one key player when you're trying to understand a potential match outcome? It's a tricky balance.
It really is. Something to think about.
Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Just a reminder, as always, that this content is for informational purposes only. Any predictions discussed are generated by AI from the source material, and they certainly do not guarantee any outcome. This should not be considered financial or betting advice.
And please remember, gambling can be addictive, so please bet responsibly. If you or someone you know needs help, resources are available.
For support in North America, you can contact the National Problem Gambling Helpline. That number is 1-800-522-4700. It's available 24/7 for confidential help.
And in the UK, you can reach out to BeGambleWare at 0808-802-0133, or you can visit begambleaware.org for information and support.
Please bet smart, bet safe, and remember to keep things fun and balanced. As the sources reminded us throughout, AI predicts probability, not fate. We'll see you next time for more insights.